Welcome back to Table Talk, the weekly variety show where we explore tabletop games and hobby-related topics. I'm Chase from the Table Gaming, and my co-host Simon joins me as always. And let's get into it.
Fantastic. Well, our first show last week, how do you think it went?
Actually, I was surprised by the feedback. There's a lot of positive comments, and thank you guys so much. Be sure to, as always, leave us comments in the YouTube, Facebook pages, etc., to let us know how we're doing or things that you'd like to see. But one of the ones that really stood out to me was someone said, just stumbled on this podcast, loved it. They've totally lost their competitive edge gaming-wise, so they're completely interested in friendly gaming experiences and how we covered a lot of awesome stuff. Yeah, man, this has been a really interesting year for gaming, and so I think it's really fun to be looking at and maybe broadening our horizons and looking at a lot of other games, and that's kind of what we hope to do at the core of this show.
Absolutely. I think we had one comment where one individual was concerned that we were getting a little bit too deep into Games Workshop land. And this is not really the intent for this show. We want to cover a whole bunch of different games, a wide variety. So, maybe people can learn about things, try new things out, and obviously share their knowledge as well. We want to speak to people who play games so they can come on the show and educate us on things as well. There was one comment, though, maybe we're doing this to get free stuff from Games Workshop. And I don't think that's the case, but, we're not proud people. And if anyone's got a hookup, please let us know. We'll take what they're giving. So, but no, seriously, this is very much a variety gaming show. We're going to be covering some pretty diverse subjects in future.
And so speaking of that, what are maybe some things that you'd like to explore in the future?
Good question. Obviously new games and games that I haven't really tried before. So just so folks at home know, myself and Chase were discussing maybe covering games that kind of stopped, games that have good value, they're fantastic games, but they no longer have support. Games like Rune Wars comes to mind, and I know there's quite a passionate player base there. I bought the box set initially. Shamefully, it sat in the box, but I kind of got that itch to get it out again and see what I'm missing out on. So if anybody at home is a Rune Wars fan or has any ideas about other games like that, then let us know. We'll be delighted to cover them.
We also want to look at, solo games, right? Being during this pandemic, it's been really hard as it is. And so, if you guys have suggestions for any games that you love that can be played solo or maybe cooperatively in like a small cohort or bubble, let us know in the comments below, and we would love to investigate and explore those. And then
certainly games that you can blackmail a partner to play, or maybe kids, so they could actually play along as well. I guess one thing that we kind of touched on last week was some of the games which you can learn solo, but then you can play within a larger group as well. And I think Curse City falls into that sort of segment. So anything like that. Also, some games can be played against somebody else, but there's also sort of homebrew rules where you can actually play them solo. So again, if anyone has any ideas there, I'd be delighted to give it a shot.
I mean, there's so much good stuff out there. I spent a lot of today looking through different miniatures online and trying to convince myself like over and over again, like I don't need to buy any new miniatures. I'm gonna hold off for a little bit more until I just finish up painting this next unit. I mean, I've got my Napoleonic line infantrymen that I did a video on back in like August, and I painted half of them. And I've got to get back in there and paint the rest of them before I get any other new stuff. How about you? Any new miniatures that you've gotten that you're looking forward to painting or putting together?
So we last week we touched on some of the new Lumineth releases, and I was always on the fence about those guys. I didn't like the guys with the cow horns very much, but last week's news kind of pushed me over the edge. So I went ahead and acquired the Lumineth Realm Lords.
Man.
Box. This is a limited box, but you can still get it on eBay pretty cheaply, and it's actually cheaper than it was when it first came out. So the models are exquisite, and I'm in the process of actually washing the sprues, carefully making sure that all the mold releases off those sprues, and I kind of do that a lot. I don't really do anything after that. I've got a bunch of really clean sprues in boxes ready to go, but just not the time to do anything with them.
So you just jump in the shower with them? Is that how you're saying you do it, and just kind of sing a little song here, scrubbing?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what you asked me to do, Chase, but that's not going to happen. So I just did them in the sink
for the sake of the segment, Simon. Come on, you got to think of the greater good.
Sure, we can come up with something. It's Valentine's Day's coming up, so maybe that could be a treat for all the viewers at home.
Oh no, viewership's going to drop dramatically. I fear.
Absolutely.
So, speaking of miniatures, and I know you also have a resin printer, right? And you got to do a little bit of cleaning on miniatures like that. Are there any like miniature lines that you look at for 3D printing?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I've got a Elegoo Saturn, which is quite a large high resolution printer. They're kind of hard to get hold of. You have to sort of keep looking out on Amazon, but they are absolutely worth the money. I wouldn't recommend paying over MSRP for it, but if you can get one, I would strongly consider it. I know a lot of people have got concerns about resin and safety and things like that, so you have to be very careful. But since I've had it, I've sort of looked online at different Patreons because I feel that that's the current best way of getting sort of monthly updates. Is a very successful model, and there's a couple that I'm interested in. Loot Studios do some absolutely exquisite miniatures. These are primarily for Dungeons and Dragons, but you can use them for any game, and they are of such high quality. The person who sculpts them, I can't remember the gentleman's name. He used to be an artist for a bunch of video games. So these are realistically proportioned, kind of non-heroic form figures, and they are a breath of fresh air. So if anybody wants to look at Loot Studios, check those guys out. You'll be very happy with what you've seen. There is actually a new project, which is called Grid Wars, Age of Cyberpunk. And I think this came out probably just today. This is from Titan Forge Games. And Titan Forge Games were producing fantasy miniatures for quite a long time. One of the longest running sort of Patreons for people to get hold of monthly releases that they can print at home. They did pivot into something called Cyberforge as well, I believe. And I signed up for that. But when I actually saw the miniatures themselves, I was a little bit disappointed. They moved away from what I felt was cyber into more sort of 40K territory, sort of like futuristic armies and things like that. And they did have a splattering of sort of cyberpunk type miniatures, but just recently they've announced Grid Wars, and I'm really happy with what I've seen here. There's some really high quality miniatures. I'm sure Chase is going to throw these up on the screen here. But if you sort of want something to print out which are very characterful, slightly more unusual models, something you can't get elsewhere, then do so. These would be great proxies for games like Infinity, if you wanted to play that. So yeah, definitely check that one out.
Yeah, that's I'm always kind of keeping an eye out towards 3D printers. That's sort of in the kind of the fringes of my mind here. So maybe we'll cycle back around and talk about that more on a future episode as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of future episodes, we've got some big plans for next week, haven't we, Chase?
Oh my goodness, yes we have. So you guys may know that on February 3rd there is going to be a big Star Wars announcement. FFG is kind of having the Star Wars components move over to AMG. So it's kind of just moving from one alphabet soup to another. Atomic Mass Games is going to be picking them up. And we're going to hear about that and the kind of the first big announcement. So we're looking forward to having an episode covering what's going to be revealed there. And also, Simon, we might have some other cool segments in the works for that.
Yeah, I think you've twisted my arm a little bit here.
There we go.
In terms of the Atomic Mass Games, I think a lot of people are looking to see what is the future of Legion, what's actually going to look like. There's been a couple of articles as to potentially what we might be seeing, but I think people are looking for something a little bit more solid. It's a favorite game for a lot of people, and people are very highly invested in it. And so obviously there's concern with any change. I think Atomic Mass Games are a very capable set of hands, and so I'm quite excited to see what they can come up with. They've certainly got some pretty high watermark in terms of quality here to match what FFG have done, because I think they've done a tremendous sort of job with the game. In terms of this mystery segment, as some people may know anyway, I convert Star Wars miniatures so they have LED lightsabers, and I'm sure that people have seen this out all over the place, photographs of them, but one question still remains: how do you do it? And I hope to cover in extreme detail how you can get some fantastic results with these miniatures as well. I'll tell you everything you need, from exactly which tools you need to acquire, how to put the miniatures together, how this actually works. What are you doing when you do this? And also, one of the problems which persists is, how do I connect the battery to it and make it work well? So we're going to be covering all of that in a specialist segment next week.
Well, that will be fantastic. I know that's something I've been interested in a long time, and you do such phenomenal work. People have probably seen your LED lightsabers in the Star Wars Legion Facebook group, and so now kind of bring this opening up to the masses. So we're kind of breaking that like rule of two. it's not just the master and the apprentice. Now it can be a whole bunch of people, a bunch of younglings can join in. Now we can
absolutely. I've joined the dark side, Chase. So those younglings better watch out. I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of people in the community who do very similar type stuff, but I want to make sure it's accessible and people really understand the process.
Absolutely, and that's so great. We also have then for today a few other things we want to explore. We have Andy Hobday, who's going to be talking to us about his work on some of the games you might already know, like Mortal Gods, Gangs of Rome, and most recently Baron's War. So I'm really excited to have him come on the show and get to pick his brain a little bit. Now, this is going to be actually broken into 2 parts. So the first part's going to be focusing mostly on how he got into game design and his background, as well as his work on some of the things like Mortal Gods and those earlier historics. We'll also hit on some new projects he's involved with, like Coven, and that's kind of one of the ones I'm kind of most interested to hear about what develops in the future. So that's going to be really great, and we're excited to introduce him and bring him in here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fair to say that Andy was extremely generous with his time, and we've got a fantastic interview lined up. Yes. He was great to talk to, and I really hope that people enjoy the content, because Andy was very, like I said, put a lot of time into this, and it gave us a little bit of news as to what potentially might be coming down the pipe for some of these other games as well.
Hope he doesn't get in trouble for that spoiler with his business partner, Mark Farr. So
yeah, you'll have to stay tuned for that one. Anyway, before we get into this, Chase, I better just change my top, okay?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, then. Andy, thank you very much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me.
We're big fans of all of your different projects, and hopefully we can talk about a few different things today. So I want to know a little bit more about you to start with. And I think we have the same entry level into the hobby initially. So as a kid, one of the things that really drew me into hobbying and high fantasy was fighting fantasy books. And I believe that you started with Warlock of Firetop Mountain. Is that correct?
That is absolutely 100% correct. Yeah. My dad had bought the book for a friend of his son who was in hospital. And it was the first he'd ever heard of it. And he thought that I would like it. And he bought it for me, and that was it. I was away.
Yeah, absolutely. Were you someone who put your fingers in the pages, or were you playing through properly?
Well, the Fighting Fantasy police aren't going to turn up, are they? We're honest about it. Yeah. To start with, I played it properly, but then obviously, you want to try and get to the end. So the odd finger did get put in the odd page.
So how did you move from that into sort of fantasy wargaming? What was your path next?
Dungeons and Dragons. That was the stepping stone for me. I collected the Fighting Fantasy books, played them for some time, as much as I could, but it was never enough, because I always found that the choices were quite limited. Obviously, you could go to page this or page that, and then someone, I think there was a discussion at school, and someone mentioned Dungeons and Dragons at the time, and we're talking way back. I don't think it was the very first one. I'm not that old, but it was the red basic book, softback book, and that was it. Once I had that, it never left my side. The actual original copy that I had disintegrated in the end, but that was my gateway into everything. And after playing lots and lots of D&D and playing lots and lots of dwarves to start with, I ended up, and we played with miniatures at the time as well. I ended up with so many dwarf characters I didn't know what to do with, and that was the stepping stone into Warhammer Fantasy Battle,
right?
First edition. Funny enough, a friend of mine had found it, and he said, "I know what we can do with your dwarves," and that was it. That. Never looked back. I have got that somewhere. It's in my room somewhere. Still my first.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So that was it. And the second edition, you got a free dwarf as well, Sorin Sorgrimson, and that was it. I was hooked. I was totally committed then.
Was that in the box with? It's like red on the outside of it.
That's it, around the rim. Yeah, the second one had the red around the rim. Yeah, and you had to send off for him. Yeah.
I never got a dwarf in mine, so I didn't realize it had like three books in it, and it had like the rules, the background, and something else. But no,
But
I
magic.
didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't even know about that, so I missed out. Never mind.
And then also you have a background. I have to jump in here. You have a background in martial arts as well. That's something that's been a pastime of mine, and I just happened to note that maybe we have a cross thread here.
Yeah. Yes. I stopped. I have stopped though. But I did Yoshinkan Aikido for just over 15 years, and at one time, I was thinking of chucking it all in and moving to New Zealand because my instructor is in Melbourne, Australia, and opening a full-time dojo. That was my plan.
Oh, but luckily, fortunately, we still have you here making all these tabletop war games. It'd be a totally different video here otherwise.
Yeah. It was my thing for 10 years, as well as gaming, of course. But every night, training, teaching. Yeah, have my own dojo.
Oh man! Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So do you find that like any of the philosophy, especially coming from a keto background, do you feel like that's like maybe spilled over into your games or the way you approach games at all? Like maybe even game design?
Yeah, I think. No one's asked me that question.
We're going deep here. We're going
down the
straight
rabbit
hole.
What is the meaning of life?
I think it has, not consciously, but I think it has, because one of the things that I started doing martial arts because it was cool. And someone I knew was a teacher, and he said, come along and do it. And, you spend that first 12 months thinking that you're really hard and really cool. And then,
yes, that's so true.
because you do. And then, there's a group of you in the corner after 9 months just beating the living daylights out of each other, and everybody else is going, well, but when you get past that, I think what it did was it taught me a lot about myself. So, and a lot of it allowed me to get rid of the things I didn't like, allow me to keep the things I liked. And that has shaped the way that I address a lot of things. So it's played a massive part in my life. There's no doubt about that. And it's helped me understand from my 20s into my 40s who I was. So I think holistically, it has obviously affected how I deal with things and how I treat other people as well. Definitely that. Yeah.
That really resonates with my experience as well. So it's always nice to hear a common person on a common voyage here.
Absolutely. And I think when I know this sounds really Mr. Miyagi, but when everything's stripped bare, you see what's left, don't you? And martial arts taught me that, I think.
Fantastic.
Fascinating. Well, moving from personal to professional, reading your resume and doing a little bit of investigation online. Obviously, you've been involved with Games Workshop in the 90s and more recently Warlord before forming Footsore. Can you talk a little bit about Games Workshop in the 90s, moving to Warlord? What kind of things were you involved with? I think you're working on the IT side, but really interested to understand what it felt like to work on some of those projects.
Yeah, of course. When I joined Games Workshop, 93, I think. I actually started in retail. So I was working in the stores, and I worked in retail stores for about 4 or 5 years. So and all over the country. So I ended up in London running the Oxford Street store. But the major thing I think was everybody calls it the golden days and all of this, the golden years. But I think it's quite a privilege to be working at Games Workshop at that time when some of these games came out, like Necromunda. Yeah. And Man of War was the first game that was released when I started. I was there about 4 or 5 months working in a Derby store, and Man of War was released, and we got swords and eye patches and all of that, and for about 3 to 6 months we were just playing Man of War in the store with anybody who was silly enough to come in, and all pretending to be pirates, and that's what it was like, and that's what I will take away from working in the stores. The whole idea was, yes, it was hard work and all of that kind of stuff, but you got to talk about your hobby and you got to show people. And it was very, very difficult back then, because these days you go somewhere and you say, I make toy soldiers, I develop games, and people look at you blank and you go, Games Workshop, and they go, oh, Games Workshop. We never had that back then. It was still, Games Workshop, what's that? And you had to pick back. And I think we ended up picking back to Dungeons and Dragons. And that was the link that people got. But Games Workshop is so big now that everybody knows it. But back when we were there, it was still very niche. There was only 20 odd stores when I started, 26 stores in the UK. But we were in that process of releasing all these cool games, like Man of War, Necromunda, and it was just great. It was just fun, it was just a real fun time to be there, Necromunda. First, I mean, this sounds so ridiculous now. I can just hear it in my head, but 3-dimensional scenery.
Yeah.
And it was made out of card and bits of plastic. And nowadays everybody goes, that's rubbish. Look at what they do now. But this was just amazing. Every game that we used to play was on a bowling green. And we went to a manager's meeting for the release of Necromunda, and we saw the terrain, and it was like, whoa, we couldn't believe it, that the whole game was about getting in below and looking through things to, if you could see it, you could shoot it. These are all things that everybody, I think, takes for granted these days. But at that time, it was just mind blowing. We were just totally blown. And John Blanche was there, and Jess Goodwind and Rick Presley, and they were releasing the houses. Here's the Escher. Because we had no idea about any of this. This is the Escher. The symbol had come up, boom, 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 boom. They'd come out and talk about it, and then the Delac, dun, 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 and everybody was like, whoa, and So that's what it was like. It was very much like that, and I think it's a lot like what they're doing now, but they're obviously doing it with a bigger budget.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. But I loved it, and sorry, I stayed in retail for about 4 or 5 years, and I ended up on secondment in IT. So I moved in there to help them. They needed a retail person to go in and do help them with some till project, and it turns out that I had a natural affinity for programming, and I then stayed in IT for about 9 years doing IT systems, and was involved with opening a lot of the international branches. So I'd go to America, or I'd go to Canada, or I'd go to Australia and help set up the computer systems and all of that. So it was I tell you what, it was a wonderful time. I had a fabulous time at Games Workshop, and I was there 13, nearly 15 years. And I wouldn't, because I say this because a lot of people are like this and that about Games Workshop. I think they are, they're everything that everything else is built on, I think.
I think they're really much the touchstone for so many different, certainly the high watermark for miniature design, game design, just experiences, licensing, everything. These projects are so pervasive.
I agree. I left in, I think about 2007, and I didn't go back then for about 2017. I don't know why. I just never, and then I went back to Warhammer World about 5 years ago and just saw how much it had moved on. And I was just absolutely blown away with how the development and everything that they're doing now. It's no one touches them, in my opinion, and I think no one will. I think they crossed that threshold to be like Star Wars. I think it's all about the IP now, and I think that's where they are.
It's like kind of like a critical mass. Once you get embedded in all these other types of projects, then these things. And so people are so excited about the new projects and new things coming. We covered Warhammer Quest, the forthcoming. What's it called? Curse City. Can't wait to get our hands on that. The models look incredible. So they continue to innovate. In fact, I got my Lumineth arrived yesterday, and I looked at those models, and there's a lot to do with those guys as well.
Yes, so. They are. They're the bleeding edge, aren't they? And they've still got people like Jess there, and Jess Goodwin's still there. He's obviously doing a different role now, and John Blanche is there, and it's a shame Rick has gone, because they would be my holy trinity. I think if I was building a boy band for games, to create a game, they would be my people. I would get Jez and John and Rick in, and that would be the three, I think.
Wonderful. So following Games Workshop, you moved over to Warlord Games. And I think this is where we saw potentially work on some of the actual gaming projects themselves with Test of Honor. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I when I first left GW, I actually went and did a lot of web development first. So when I left, I was institutionalized, so I wasn't sure what I was going to do. So I went and I learned web development. It was, this whole idea of these development houses was quite a new thing. So I did that, and I learned how to all the HTML and stuff. And then when I left, John Stallard and Paul had left about the same time, and they contacted me and said, look, we're setting up Warlord Games. Could you help us with the IT side of stuff? I said, yeah, of course. And I ended up building their first website for them. So that was the connection. And then I kind of supported them for a few years while I was doing other stuff. So I built a couple of sites for them, and I did their newsletters and all of that kind of stuff while they were releasing, Plastic Romans for the first time and doing all this cool stuff. And then after a few years, they asked me if I'd come on board. So, I said, yeah, well, why not? So I was there for about 7 years. So when I joined them, I was doing all of their website, all of their direct sales, all of that kind of thing, running all of their mail order. And in my spare time, they were quite open for us to do our own projects. So, I did Test of Honor at the time when I was there, but I also was lucky enough to work with Rick on Antares. So Beyond the Gates of Antares. Ooh. So Rick had created his new sci-fi game, and which is cracking if you haven't played it. The actual rule mechanics are amazing, and it was the first thing I wrote. The intro book for it. There was a Kara 9, and I did the beginner book for that, and with Rick and stuff, and that was the first thing I did. So off the back of there, Warlord were interested in other things that we were doing. And at the time, going back to, it's all topical, going back to the martial arts connection, I wanted to play a samurai game.
Yeah.
And there is some great ones out there, like Ronin and Daisho and all of this, but none of them were actually ticking all the right boxes for me. I really wanted to do something very Kurosawa-ish, like Seventh Samurai, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So it'd be quite cinematic. And Graham Davey, who I knew from Games Workshop and Aikido, funny enough, that's the connection. We decided to develop our own samurai game, and it just started as a way for us to play small skirmish Kurosawa-esque games, and it kind of grew and grew and grew, and we play tested it for about 18 months. Well, I say play, it wasn't even play testing it. We were playing it for 18 months after school, at Warlord, and Warlord had acquired Wargames Factory. Mm-hmm. So all of the plastic models from Wargames Factory, and in there was some samurai. So they said, well, you've got these rules that we have, would you want to put them together with some plastic samurai? And that's how Test of Honor came about.
Wonderful. It's very clear to me that you're very passionate about the projects that you work on, not just because of the game, but also because you want to play it as well. You're building experiences that you want to play.
I am very selfish, if I'm being honest, when it comes to gaming. I exactly do that. I play the games that I want to play, and I write the games that I want to play. And then if there's enough interest, we release them. And it's just a great position to be in, I think.
Yeah, well, you certainly like playing a lot of games because you've developed a lot of games as well.
Yeah.
I think, so just to get the timeline right then, the first one that you worked on was Test of Honor. And then was it Gangs of Rome next, or was it Mortal Gods?
Yeah, Gangs of Rome was next. when I left Warlord, I went on to do Footsore, and funny, it was when when I first went, the first figures that I was interested in doing was some Barons War figures. That was the first thing I was going to do, and then one of the chaps who works there, Darren, he's really deep into Rome, and we were having this discussion as you do over a few beers, and we were talking about stuff, and we disappeared down this rabbit hole of what if you fight in Rome and you have these gangs, and it just kind of like ballooned out from there. So Darren had created all of this idea, and then I got to work with a chap called Adam L. Dobbins as well on it. And that was the first game that we did. And we were totally naive and totally not sure. But again, it was the whole excitement pulled it through. Adam would be writing stuff. We would be playtesting it. I'd be feeding back. We'd change some stuff. It'd come in. And it kind of developed like that. Because Adam was in Australia, lives in Australia. It was virtually like a 24-hour project.
Yep.
So that was quite a good experience. And the buildings that came, the buildings are what with Gangs of Rome. I know the chaps at Sarissa really well, Sarissa Precision, and that came because they supported us when we did Test of Honor. So we'd asked for some buildings to play test with. So we'd asked all these people, and no one had responded but Sarissa. And Sarissa gave us more buildings. I mean, we could have built Tokyo with the buildings that they gave us. I actually gave them
built
some
Rome.
back.
Is that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. But so from that, I just said to Steve at Sarissa, could you just do me a couple of Roman buildings for Gangs of Rome? He said, yeah, of course. And I came back a few weeks later, and there was 30 buildings they had. They built Rome, and it was that's where it went from.
I'm seeing another theme here. You're mentioning scenery and buildings and gangs, and you mentioned Necromunda earlier. Was that ever discussed when you were developing Gangs of Rome?
Only in the let's not make it Rome Necromunda. What we did was with Gangs of Rome, which I really liked, but I don't think it was ever. I think it was a bit Marmite for people. Some people liked it, some people didn't like it. I think when we released the fighter, we created 10,000 different cards for the actual gang fighters. And each one was individual. Each one was different. So they had different stats or different name, different gods. They worship different skills. So whenever you bought them, they were you never got two fighters the same, because the idea was they were going to be the population of Rome.
Right.
Wow.
But it was a blind buy. So we used to get people saying, "Oh, but I want all the cards." And it's like, well, you can have all 10,000 if you want to pay for them. That's fine. So the attraction of the game for me was that you would get what you were given, and you would have to try and create a gang that worked around those fighters. And some people liked it and some people didn't. So I think it got some traction in some quarters and some it didn't. And I think that's what made it quite different to any other game that was out there.
So then how did you make the jump over to Mortal Gods? And I just want to preface this by saying, coming from A Song of Ice and Fire, I really like games that are kind of a curated experience, and historicals were really intimidating to me. And I looked at a lot of things. We had Duncan Rhodes come on. He was trying to help me piece things out, make sight of the landscape. And ultimately I ended up being like, Mortal Gods, this is the one. This is accessible enough. It has the depth, but I can get right into the box, and, just such a fantastic entry point, but still having enough room to grow and be in that historical game sphere. And also, you took some liberties, but never enough that it cut away from the thing. We'll talk about Mythic in a second, but what was your inspiration to make Mortal Gods?
Simon stole all my thunder. I make things that I'm really interested in.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I love Greece, as a place. I love the ancient Greek history, all of that kind of thing. It's something that I have a lot of interest in. Me and my wife visit Greece a lot. We've been to most of the islands. I've read the Iliad. the Odyssey, etc. Growing up, unfortunately, I had a boarding school upbringing, so you had to do it all. But what does it for me? And I it's funny you should ask this. I was thinking about this the other day. Funny enough, I like samurai because of the uniqueness about them, and the fact that they're enclosed on an island, and their history was their own history for so long. So even though they were out and about at the same time as medieval knights, it's very interesting to see the difference in their culture. And when you look at ancient Greece, the Greek hoplite as a warrior is another one of these really iconic heroes. And his paraphernalia he's wearing, he's got his helmet, his big shield, even the sword is of the coppice is a certain shape, the way they fought, but and this is where I might get burnt alive by the historical brigade. Playing hoplites is so boring when you play ancient war games, because you line them up in a phalanx and you march and march and march and march to the other side, and they push for a bit, and then one side would break and the other would fight, and that's your fight. And I wanted to play a game with some hoplites, and I didn't want to play that. So I created that instead.
Right, and they can still form up. You kind of get it. It's like the hoplite light, or phalanx light. But what's so cool about it is it feels like you Mortal Gods really captures the feel. It doesn't sacrifice any of that. I feel like I can see the love you have for the subject come through in the game.
Absolutely. And you can and everybody's going, don't do it. It's not a phalanx, is it? Let's be honest. It's nine dudes together, but we tried to call it everything else under the sun, and everybody kept referring to it as a phalanx. So it had to stay. So I'm guilty of that one. I'll take that one. But you're right. I'm not a historian. I like history. I'm an armchair historian. I read a lot of history books, but I'm a gamer first. So when I create a game, I look at the game and the way that the game will play, and then you layer the history on top. But you have to respect the history,
right?
But the history can't, for me anyway, it can't make the game weaker or detract from the gaming experience.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because sometimes when you try and get people into new games, it's not the history that brings them to the table. It's the experience, it's the fun. And the history itself, when it's added into there in such a way that it's pervasive, but it's not confrontational, people really enjoy that experience. And it spurs them to learn more about that particular history. When we talk about Baron's War, I've done a lot of reading since I've learned more about that. So I think that's exactly what people want. Certainly, this is the kind of experiences that I'm sort of most drawn to, for sure.
I think so. I think, it's like Chase says, it's very intimidating. So what we need to do is open that door as wide as we possibly can. And I think a lot of this has come through from working at Games Workshop, which what Games Workshop is very good at is bringing people into the hobby. So, and you can do this with Games Workshop. If you just want to get your Space Marines and paint them any color you want and play and push them around, that's great. If you then want to go and read the Horus Heresy, great. But shouldn't history be the same? I like Greek hoplites. They look really cool. I'll paint some and play a game. I want to learn more about Greek hoplites. I'll go and read some books. I think, unfortunately, when historical gamers, you need to read the books first before you can have a game. And I think that's the barrier.
Yeah. And it fosters a love of the subject. I picked up some Osprey books. I've definitely read more about hoplites now than I ever thought I would, because once I picked up your game, I was like, oh man, this is actually really cool. Without getting too down the rabbit hole, Simon, sorry, as we digress a little bit. If you guys haven't played, if you're watching this, you haven't played Mortal Gods, one of the things you throw in there is these omens. And there's a lot of little layers you put on that put an extra theme. Could you maybe just speak to that mechanic and maybe how that kind of draws out a Greek flavor, right, in the game?
It's a real good choice, because the omens came as a way of dealing with a mechanic that we needed to put into the game. So it's the same with, we found this in Test of Honor. You draw, you alternate your draw, and if whatever pebble or token you draw out, you get to move that type of troop. What we found was if you were doing that draw and working all the way to the end of the bag, it was, the tactics were very simple. What you did was you just put all your cannon fodder in first, because you knew that all your good guys, your tough guys are going to get to go afterwards. So you'd use your cannon fodder to soak up all of the actions of your opponent. So we put these extra tokens or pebbles in, as it is for Mortal Gods, because what happens is if you draw the 3 pebbles out, that's the end of the turn. So even if everybody hasn't moved, when the 3rd red pebble comes out, the turn stops. So if there's something that you want to do, you have to take that into consideration, that those pebbles might be coming out before you do it. So it's a great mechanic, and it dealt with that issue. Unfortunately, though, what happens is if I draw my red pebble out, I don't get to go, because obviously that's just the pebble. So we wanted to put something in there to make those pebbles being drawn, and that's where the omens came from. We wanted, because again, with being Greeks, when they went to battle, if a raven flew backwards over the battlefield, they'd all turn around and go home, or lightning struck a tree. That was, they were a very superstitious bunch. So we added the omen cards in to do that. So whenever you draw this red pebble now, you draw an omen card and you have to enact what's on the card. And some of them are good, some of them are bad. So it also adds that kind of watchful eye of the gods.
Absolutely. So with these types of games, obviously you're talking a lot about the rules here, but these games are really supportive with some fantastic miniatures from Footsore. How are you involved in the design and the production of the miniatures as well? Because I know that Footsore create their own pewter miniatures, and you have a production where you support your Kickstarters and potentially all the games that you have. What's your involvement with that process?
I'm pretty lucky that if it's something that I'm involved in or I'm creating, I get quite a large say on what we're doing or who we use. With my relationship with Footsore is I own half the business, so I'm one of the owners, but I don't actually work there. So it's not my job. So it's a great vehicle for me to do things through and use for projects. But at the end of the day, Mark, who's my partner, he gets the final say because he's running the business day to day. Luckily, though, I've known Mark over 20 years, and he's from a Games Workshop background. He used to run, you remember Marauder Miniatures years and years ago? Wow. Yeah, so he used to run Marauder Miniatures with Trish and Ali Morrison. So his knowledge, his actual practical knowledge of miniatures is, blows mine away. However, when we're creating the game or we're writing certain things, we'll go into a huddle and decide on what we're going to do. And then we'll create the list of miniatures we're going to do. Luckily, all the sculptors that we work with, we've now got a relationship with. So initially when we started, the brief would have been quite tight. Mm-hmm. These days, and the Baron's Wall is a good example. I mean, I've known Paul Hicks for 20 years. I can go, Paul, make me some knights. And he'll go, oh, okay. And I want these kind of helmets. And then we get back fabulous miniatures. But I think it's just because we're very lucky to work with great sculptors. Matt Bickley, these guys in the historical realm are just cracking. So these days, it really is. Here's some cool pictures we'd get excited about. Use that for inspiration. Go and make me some miniatures, and that's kind of what we get. That's the design process.
Yeah, I'm sure that Chase is thinking about this segment and all the B-roll that he's going to put over the top of all your fantastic miniatures. We've been perusing your website for a number of days now, and there's certain characters that I love. I think one thing which really stands out is the miniatures are very characterful. Even though they're historic, you can see the care and attention to detail that went in. One of my favorite miniatures, before we go any further, is this guy here.
Oh yes,
King Redwald from Sutton Hoo, apparently. So I saw the miniature on the website there, and you've basically taken one of the people who dress up as these characters, and you've recreated it in such fine detail that I looked at the shield and the spear and everything on that particular miniature. Chase, if you want to put that up on the screen, that'll look great. That for me is one of my favorite characters, because I used to live there and it's very involved in.
I love it. I love that area, Simon. I spend a lot of time over there. If I'm not in Greece, you'll find me over in Norfolk or Suffolk.
Okay, fantastic. So, well, if I'm ever back home and you're there as well, we'll meet up for sure. Maybe have a
that'd be ace. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you also have with Mortal Gods Mythic, you've also strayed into the the mythical or the fantastical, and there's some pretty amazing stuff there. And the best thing about that is it captures a lot of that like Ray Harryhausen, like Jason the Argonauts feel. I think is it Zeus? I think in that group they have like some skeletons, and it's just like, oh my god, this is so cool. What inspired the shift to that? Or
I think we always had one eye on it. I am of a certain age, so I watched a lot of Harryhausen stuff growing up. So there was always an interest, and that's why they look like they do. And Mark is the same. However, do you know what the major shift was? People asking for it.
Okay.
So they were saying, well, you've done this, you've done these Greek heroes, you've done all this. Are you going to do the mythical side? And I couldn't really think of a reason to say no. And we banged our heads together and thought of how we were going to do it. And then when we started playtesting it with the bigger monsters, and it just became the same but a very different game. And the way that Mortal Gods is structured, with the size of your low cost that you create, putting one or two big creatures in, all the skeletons, etc., it was very easy to incorporate them, and the gameplay stayed very tight.
Do you have like a favorite faction for Mortal Gods Mythic? Is there
I do like the Hydra, I must admit.
Okay,
so,
yeah, that's a fantastic sculpt too.
Well, we were very lucky again, because of Mark's relationship from World of Miniatures. Him and Trish Cardan, who used to be Trish Morrison, who was the creature lady from Games Workshop. She sculpted all of those for us. So we were very lucky to have those, and that's why it looks cracking. She's just working on some new stuff for us for Mythic, because we got a further Mythic release this year. So we're looking to add a couple of factions. So I want to. The jury's still out at the moment, but I'd like to add Poseidon, and we're also looking to add the Smith God, so we can have some like automatons and that kind of stuff.
So cool.
So that's where we are.
Was the one from,
yes,
we get some hate on that one, but we'll see. Okay.
So that's it. That's on the cards. She's already made us some new creatures. So we got Cerberus is coming. We got there's a griffin. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but Mark's not here, so it's okay. I don't mind. I saw some photos yesterday of the griffin that Trisha's done for us. And and I'm not just saying this because it's ours, it is the best griffin I have ever seen.
Oh, man.
So we will be previewing that mid-year, probably. But I keep saying to Mark, I'm putting a high elf on that. I'm having a high elf on that griffin.
That's awesome. How do you anticipate the project will get to people then? Are you looking to use Kickstarter as a channel for this type of project, or is it retail? What are you thinking?
For Mythic, I think we'll kickstart it again. I think by doing that, it allows us to do a lot of big monsters. And that's what we want to do. And again, it gives a good reach, and it's already got a following. And what we are finding by doing Kickstarter, it allows us to do just a lot more. And all that profit that we make, we just pour back in. We pour back into the same project, so it allows us to grow games a lot faster. That's what we've learned.
That's wonderful. So one thing I've noticed, talking about a lot of the mythical creatures, one of the other projects which you announced last year was a project named Coven, where we're certainly getting into more sort of high fantasy type models. Can you tell us a bit more about that? I've seen the video, but I haven't really heard much about the game itself and what you've got planned.
Yes, I can. Coven is something totally separate from Footsore. I think I'm the only thing that straddles both camps.
Right.
So Coven is a project with 4 friends, which has been driven by an artist called John Wigley. And John Wigley was a Games Workshop artist. A lot of people will know his work from Mordheim. And I went to, funny enough, John collects samurai armor. So actual proper samurai armor. So I went to see him to talk to him about doing some drawings, some samurai type drawings for me. And he got his armor out as he does. It's like going to a museum. It's so impressive. But while we were there, he did one of these, these November drawing challenges, and he started drawing witches, like Eastern European witches, and he drew a witch a day for 30 days and creatures. And the stuff he'd done was just mind blowing. We were in his studio and he was going, "How about this? How about this?" He's just like, "What do you think of this?" I was like, "John, that's a game." Yeah, that's a game. So he's been drawing for about 18 months now, and painting, and the stuff he's done is just phenomenal. I mean, it's just mind blowing. So it's going to be a skirmish game, and this is what you want, really, isn't it? It's going to be a skirmish game.
Yep.
And it's all going to be campaign based, and the way that it'll work is let's call them war bands for now. We haven't got a final name for them. It'd be easy to call it a coven if it was a witch, but it isn't. It's war bands. Your war band will grow and change between game to game, and what happens in the game will impact on that, and objectives that you capture will impact on that. And it's your leader of your band, so your witch or your village hetman or your militia leader. They're the ones whose experience will grow and their power will grow, and by them growing and getting more powerful, they will attract different creatures or demons or soldiers or different villages to them, and the game will play out like that. So the idea is it'll be a skirmish type game. So I envisage about bits, maybe a little bit smaller than Mortal Gods, a bit bigger in between that and Test of Honor. Okay. Big things, small things, big shooty things, cavalry. But it's all drawing from Eastern European myth and legend, and it's a dark fantasy game.
There's another game I'm going to pick up now.
Yeah, can we pre-order it now? Just give you some money now. We'll just pick it up. One of my favorite characters is someone called Koshchai the Deathless. Basically, I think he's a Slovakian sort of warlock who hides. It's a whole story behind it if people are interested. But I hope to see characters like that, sort of slightly more obscure ones as well. That'd be fantastic.
Totally, and people will recognize the creatures because they've all come from the mythos of Eastern Europe. What we're just this is something totally different for us. So it kind of some of it will be a little bit historical, but the reality is it's from the twisted mind of John and a chap called Chris Bone, and it's going to be. I think it's something special for us. So we don't want to rush it. So
I can't wait. So I wait patiently, however, to hear more news on Coven. Hopefully this year.
Oh, totally this year. Yeah, definitely.
All right, we're going to pause right here. Be sure to like and subscribe. Next week, we'll be following up with a specific discussion about Baron's War with Andy Hobday, looking at the latest historical work he's been putting out there. Be sure to head on over to Warhost and check out their website and all the cool things he's doing. Our episode next week is also going to heavily focus on Star Wars. We've got some information coming out from Atomic Mass Games as they take over the Star Wars properties from Fantasy Flight Games. So we're going to see what does that mean for the future of Star Wars Legion, X-Wing, Armada, any other properties as well. Simon's also right now hard at work on his LED segment. We'll show you how to do LED lighting for your miniatures. We've got some really cool surprises in the works for that. So be sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, we hope to get your miniatures on the table.